Hello and welcome. I am your host for the evening, Goblin Queen, and tonight I am going to be talking about something that seems to be strangely common, at least according to Reddit posts on the paranormal subreddit. Common experience had by children, and this is seeing green hands normally coming out from under your bed. And I have had an ongoing interest for the last couple of years in paranormal experiences involving disembodied hands. I've made several episodes, my original one just dedicated to the subject, and then every time I find one, I read one with excitement because I just find them fascinating and strangely common. But I was surprised to find that in all the episodes where I read disembodied hand stories, there were with the exception of maybe one story on my Patreon, there were no green hands. And then the other day, I found so many instances of green hands, and they were really all quite similar, and I found it fascinating. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to read one main story from the paranormal subreddit, and this story had over 300 comments on it, with many people saying that they experienced something very similar. So I'm going to read that story, and then I'm going to go through the comments and kind of give my thoughts and theories on what I think may be going on here. Really just kind of expressing and indulging in my interest in it. So if that sounds good to you, let's get started. And also, if you are watching the video here on YouTube, I have Ingrid. I don't know if you can see her. It's hard to see her little face. This is Ingrid, my blind cat. My eyeless cat. I don't think she's been on camera before, so let's get started. This story was posted to the paranormal subreddit in 2020 by DreamLove94. I'm 25 years old now, and I still remember this event pretty distinctly. At the time, I was living in Aurora, Ohio, near Cleveland. It was probably either after school or during the middle of the day on a weekend, but I remember that it was in broad daylight. My brother and I shared a room with a bunk bed, where the bottom bunk was perpendicular to the top bunk, allowing for sort of a cubby of space underneath the top bunk. There was probably about a 1 foot width of space between the back of the lower bed and the wall behind it. My friend from class and I were sitting at the foot of the lower bed, playing with Pokemon cards. This was in 2001 or 2002, so Pokemon was all the rage at this point for young kids. Everything was normal, and we were having a conversation as we were messing around with the cards. Then, all of a sudden, something at the back of the bed caught the corner of my eye, so naturally, I turned to look and see what it was. As I looked to my left, the seemingly normal conversation I was having with my friend abruptly and ominously came to a halt, and both of us stared in bewilderment and complete silence. When I turned, I saw a green hand which had come up from the space behind the bed and was feeling the pillow and the bed. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 seconds, and then the hand vanished. I don't remember if it went back behind the bed or if it just dissipated. It happened very quickly. As soon as the hand disappeared, I broke the ominous silence and asked my friend sitting next to me, "Did you see that?" He replied, "The hand?" confirming that we both saw the same phenomenon. I ran across the house and told my mother what we had just seen, and she quickly brushed it off and told me it was nothing. I went back to the same room and continued playing with my friend. I wouldn't say that my friend and I were particularly scared by the event, though it was definitely very strange. I never told my little brother about it, who slept in the lower bunk, where the hand was feeling around. To this day, I remember this event distinctly, and I've looked online and have found other events that were similar to this event described on the internet. Other people claim to have seen green hands in their house, Has anyone else heard of this before? All right, so there we have our first and main story. So this was posted in 2020, and they say, the OP says that they are 25 years old now, and looking down at my notes, they said it probably happened in 2001 or 2002, which would make them roughly 7 years old, if they're remembering correctly. So many people say they're 7 years old just in terms of paranormal experiences. That age comes up so often. Maybe it's when you kind of start having memories, I'm not sure. They were playing Pokemon cards on their bunk bed when they see this green hand reach up and start feeling around on the bed. They note in the comments that their brother, whose bed it was, where the hand was feeling around, was not at home at the time, so it couldn't have been them. Although, they said there was a foot of space behind the bed and the wall, between the bed and the wall. Technically, I guess a child's arm could fit in a one-width space, probably, but just, they would have to be under the bed, I guess, and reach their hand up. I don't know if their arm would be long enough. They'd probably recognize their brother's arm, and it's probably not green. I don't know. I guess they didn't check and see if anyone was under the bed, just ran out of the room, and then they said it just dissipated. A normal person's hand wouldn't just dissipate either, right? And what's really more compelling is there's a witness with them. It's not too often that there are witnesses in paranormal encounters, so when there are, you want to say it adds validation to it, right? Definitely makes it more compelling, because 2 people saw it. They also say, in regards to it being their little brother or not, they say that it looked like an adult male's hand and arm that, quote, sort of looked like the hand on the front of a Goosebumps cover or something. And I know exactly what cover they're talking about, because I loved and continue to love Goosebumps. I still watch it on YouTube all the time. But they're definitely talking about Stay Out of the Basement, and the cover has this green hand. I might have put it as the thumbnail. This green, leafy hand reaching around a door frame. And this is something I'm going to go over as we go on. So as I go through these comments, I'm going to think about things that come up in these stories, similarities, and also points of reference that people mention or might have. And kind of at the end, I'm going to round it all up and we're going to examine our evidence a little bit. So let's go ahead and get into the comments now. So actually first, there were a couple comments that weren't hands or green hands, but were still interesting stories because people were just sharing their, in addition to sharing stories about hands, people just wanted to share their childhood paranormal experiences, right? So I'm going to read a couple of those. Paint Myself Blue says, not a hand, but my dad told me a story from when he was a kid, around 6 or 7 years old. My father told me he had terrible nightmares when he was a kid, and one night, after having a scary dream, he went and laid down beside his older brother's bed on the floor with his pillow and blanket. He said he was laying there for a few moments when something under the bed caught his eye. Under the bed was this tiny little man. He had a big beard and a large nose, and he was completely green from head to toe. My dad said he was glowing, kind of a neon green color, and as soon as he saw my father looking at him, he ran. I sometimes wonder if it was a gnome or a leprechaun, since my dad's mother was an Irish immigrant. I think about it sometimes. Your story made me remember it. That story is amazing and really caters to my interest. I love stories about fairies or gnomes or little people, and that's what it sounds like, right? A tiny, glowing, green little man with a beard, and the OP of this comment says that they wonder if it was a gnome or a leprechaun because their father has Irish ancestry. Their grandmother was from Ireland. So, yeah, very interesting. I just love that story. Let's read another one. Throwaway UFO says, my family owned a theater when I was a kid. It was an older theater, supposedly haunted, and many strange things happened there. Your story reminded me of one instance. Me and one of my brothers were in the theaters playing around, bouncing one of those 25-cent bouncy balls around. It bounced towards the top of the theater screen, where there was a curtain that ran along the top of the screen. A red devil tail, like a literal cartoon, came out of the curtain and swooped up the ball. Makes 0 sense, but it is what it is. We live in a strange universe. All right, and this one I just thought was really strange. And they say that it was a red devil tail like a literal cartoon. And I do have an interest in stories. Some people, every once in a while, you get to read a story where someone says that they saw a cartoon in real life, like a cartoon clown or something like that. Now, when they're saying like a literal cartoon, are they saying that it appeared like a cartoon, or that it was this cartoony, stereotypical devil tail depiction, the classic red devil tail? I'm not sure. Either way, really weird, very strange. All right, for our next section of comments, I'm going to read hand experiences, but these are not green hands. First, we're going to look at some hairy hands. 1 times 1 times 1 says, my grandmother was a Polish woman that swears she had a gift to see and talk to spirits. I've always told her not to pass it to me, or let me just reject this power if I could, because I'm not strong or brave enough to handle it. One of the stories she used to tell me was that when she was younger, a hand covered in hair would reach into the rooms to turn off the lights all the time. So that's the closest I've heard of anything like this. I love this comment. I love the idea of the Polish grandmother who had a psychic abilities, second sight, could talk to spirits. Would love to know her story. All of her stories. I'm sure they're amazing. This one was that she was younger, a hand that was covered with hair would reach into the room and turn off the lights all the time. So it's something that would happen recurringly. So creepy, and such a specific gesture, reaching around the doorframe to turn off the lights. And she said covered in hair. Are we talking like a really, really hairy human hand, or I'm thinking like a werewolf hand or something? So there are a couple replies to this comment that I want to read as well. Came to spill their guts says, my dad's side of the family is Latin, and they have a similar story / urban legend called La Mano Peluda, which means the hairy hand. I'm pretty sure in my original episode I did on disembodied hands, I read a couple stories and talked a little bit about La Mano Peluda, this kind of Latin, as I said, urban legend kind of story that parents would probably just use to scare their children into bedtime submission. But worth a mention. And then this next comment is from a deleted user. It says, when my dad was a kid, he and his siblings saw a hairy man's hand reach around the doorframe as if it were searching for a light switch while their dog growled and barked at it. So just like the first comments I read about the Polish grandmother, it's almost exactly the same. Their dad would see, and his siblings, so more than one person, would see a hairy man's hands reach around the doorframe as if searching for a light switch. That just blew my mind that there were 2 stories that were so specific and so similar and so strange. A hairy hand reaching around the doorframe and turning off the lights. I wonder if there's like some movie scene or something that depicts this exact scene, because that's crazy. I'm not saying that it didn't happen. It's just so crazy. Those 2 people had such similar stories. All right, so those are her hairy hands. Now, I'm not going to go into it right now, but I have a suggested source for you if you want to. Some of you may have heard of the hairy hands of Dartmoor. This is a story that, several stories possibly, that came about, I can't remember the exact date. Let's see. So it would have been, I think around the 1920s. Wikipedia says since the 1910s. Anyway, there were stories starting to circulate that drivers would be driven off the motorway by disembodied hairy hands appearing out of nowhere and grabbing their steering wheel and swerving them off the road. So it's a very interesting story. There's a lot to it. I recommend you go to the Fairy Whispering podcast channel and listen to the host Claire, her very extensive video she did on the hairy hands of Dartmoor, which I can leave a link to in the description. So that is all our hairy hands for now. Let's move on to some other non-green hands. This comment's from a deleted user, and it says, I saw a white hand with red nail polish reaching out from under my pillow as a child. I tried to convince myself that I was dreaming or hallucinating, yet I have never had anything like this happen again. So this is coming out from under the pillow, not under the bed, which, I don't know, it's a little more terrifying. It's all in your face, right? So a white hand with a red nail polish. And when they say white hand, it could mean two things, right? It could mean Caucasian, or it could mean ghostly, pale, paper white. Don't know. I'm picturing paper whites. In my first video I did on disembodied hands, the very first story I read was exactly this. It wasn't in a bedroom, though, but it was a white hand with red nail polish. Very interesting. The red nail polish is a curious detail there. Pumpkin Kitty Mew says, when I was a kid, say maybe between 5 and 8, I would see them. For me, they were always brightly colored. Green, pink, blue, and they scared the heck out of me. One day, they just stopped. I subtly asked around as an adult if anyone else had the same experience, but no one had. It kind of made me happy to read this. So, this person, they do say that they saw a green hand, right? The hands would be multicolored, come in a variety of colors, I guess. And green is one of those colors. Also pink and blue, brightly colored. And this is an occurrence of someone seeing them multiple times, which is not the majority, as we'll take a look at later. It seems to usually be a one-off thing. They don't say where they would see them. There aren't really a lot of details, right? So was this coming out from under their bed or not? We don't know. Brummer says, I saw one as a child. It was a large man's hand, severed at the wrist with marbled veins. It was crawling like a spider. The description of this one is really creepy. The hand that is severed at the wrist, which, when you just say severed, it makes it more macabre, doesn't it? With marbled veins, crawling like a spider. Really creepy. So, speaking earlier about points of reference, I mean, the Thing, or just Thing, from the Addams Family is definitely gotta be one of them, right? And this makes me think of that, because that's the motion most of the time that Thing would get around, crawling around or just jumping around. And when I bring up point of references, we'll get into this later. I'm not saying it's to discount anyone's experience. We'll get into that, but there's a point to it. Raddies Galore says, when I was a kid, I remember always sleeping with one of my hands under my pillow and off the edge of the bed, until one night I was woken up by a hand feeling mine. It was dry with blisters or something. I freaked out, but didn't feel like I was going to be harmed. I still won't hang my hands off the bed when I sleep. So in this one, it doesn't seem like they see it. They only feel it. It says they would hang their hands off the bed and wake up to a hand feeling theirs. And it felt dry and maybe blistered. I really get the impression that they didn't see it, that they just felt it. And they still won't hang their hand off the bed anymore, which it's something I've ever done. I was kind of tuck my hands under my pillow, like they said, and then the other one just kind of like up near my chest. It doesn't sound very comfortable to hang your hand off the bed. Lorana Silvermoon says, when I was a kid, I had one hand over the edge of my bed and woke up to someone touching it, saying, "Hey," loudly. I never slept with my hands out of the bed again. This comment's very similar to the last one. Same thing, hang their hands over the edge of the bed and woke up to someone touching it and saying, "Hey," loudly. The detail about the voice, the loud voice, especially kind of waking up from sleep, makes me think of exploding head syndrome, which is a crazy name, but basically it's a hypnagogic kind of like when you're falling asleep or as you're waking up, just this really loud noise that's not in real life. It's just within your head, wakes you up. And people describe a variety of different sounds. An explosion is one, as the name implies, or like a washing machine off-kilter voices. I've had this happen before, where I've been just about to fall asleep, or maybe even like it seems like it's woken me up to a loud voice, like saying "hey" really loud, and you wake up with a start, right? You're like, what? But there's nobody there, and I think it's just, I don't know. Seems like it's just kind of some parasomnia. They don't really know why it happens. So maybe it's exploding head syndrome, maybe not. Either way, it's enough to never sleep with their hands hanging out of the bed again, like the last person. Okay, now let's get into our green hands experiences. Mahita Bell says, when I was like 5 years old, I was getting dressed in my room for school. It was broad daylight. I was putting one leg into my pants when a green hand came out from under my bed and grabbed my ankle, making me stumble and almost fall. I was so freaked out I ran to find my mom, and she obviously dismissed it as my imagination. But to this day, I can remember it so vividly. So this one's quite similar to the original story we read. It was broad daylight. There's green hands that came out from under the bed, although this one grabbed their ankle and made them stumble and almost fall. And that's kind of wild to me that it actually made contact. And I don't know, you could say maybe they bumped into something that made them stumble or fall, but something grabbing your ankle is a pretty specific sensation. ChemDog66 says, wow, I can't believe my very specific Google search worked. I remember a green hand grabbing my ankle. That is so bizarre. They also had a green hand grab their ankle, and they said that they did a very specific Google search. And I find that this is something a lot of people do with paranormal encounters, is they'll just go to Google and type in green hand coming out from under my bed, just kind of type into Google their experience in hopes to find someone who experienced something similar. It comes up a couple times that people do this. Hopefully it's validating to find other people who have the same thing, but also it doesn't really give you any answers as to what it is, I guess, but probably comforting still and interesting to see that other people have experienced it, especially in this case when it's so many people. NackNuds71 says, I stopped scrolling when I saw the title of this post. When I was a small child, I have a very vague memory of a green hand coming up out of the middle of a table I had in my room. It was as if it was making circular motions back and forth. I remember telling the story of the green hand to any friend that would listen until I forgot about it entirely. Your story made me remember. That one's a little different. Green hands coming from the middle of the table and making some kind of circular motion. I don't know if it was the whole arm that was making a circular motion or just the hand. That's a little different. And then this next comment is from a deleted user, and it's pretty long. When I was around a similar age, it would have been in 1998 or 1999, I woke up laying on my right side to see a green hand and arm coming straight up from under my bed. Think like someone holding his arm at a 90-degree angle, fingers all spread with their tips pointing up towards the ceiling. The nails were long and looked as if someone had once meticulously filed them to a point, but they had since cracked and broken. It stayed in that position just barely long enough for me to comprehend what I was looking at before it began patting and groping along the edge of the bed, where I would have likely been laying if I hadn't been a center sleeper. I could hear the nails raking across the sheets. It continued stroking, patting, and groping around, even as I screamed for my parents. As soon as they came into the room and flicked the lights on, it was gone. They assured me it was a nightmare, but I'm honestly not so sure. Similarly, I once woke up in bed on my back. This would have been near the same age, and I was just about to open my eyes as a breathy voice whispered, "Look." A woman's hand in a lighter shade of the same green, this time with medium, long, painted red nails, perfectly groomed with no breakage, was hovering under my ceiling fan. It traced the movement of the fan with one finger, then spiraled towards my face with the same finger outstretched as though to poke my nose. It disappeared about a foot away from my face. This time I didn't scream because I knew they wouldn't believe me. When I say the hand was hovering up there, picture a woman standing beside a bed, pointing at the ceiling fan, except nothing except the forearm to the fingertips were visible. I had never seen anything like it since, and honestly, I don't want to. I found this kind of detail very spooky from their encounter. Well, so first of all, the green hand came up from under the bed and began patting and groping along the edge of the bed. And same with the very first story we read, where it was feeling around on the pillow in the bed. But then they said, I could hear the nails raking across the sheets. So creepy. And also to have that auditory cue with it, to hear it too. Seems like it happened 2 different times. First time they saw green hands, and then another time they were just about to open their eyes when they heard a breathy voice whisper, "Look." And then a woman's hand in a lighter shade of green with painted red nails. Again, these red nails come up. And also, they had the voice whisper. So I mentioned exploding head syndrome earlier, but I feel like it's usually a pretty loud and jarring sound. But the fact that they mentioned hearing this voice right before they woke up is worth mentioning. But so the second hand was coming down from the ceiling, tracing the movement of the fan with a finger. So a circular motion is what I'm thinking, right? And interesting that a couple comments ago, someone mentioned hands coming up from a table and doing a circular motion. So it's just kind of interesting when very specific details come up more than once. Persephone 911 says, "This happened to my sister too. When we were kids, she woke up to see a gross green witch-looking hand coming in from the window." All right, this time the hand was coming not from the bed, but from the window. Coming in from the window. Really creepy. I wonder if the window was open or not, but they said their sister saw it as well. And they describe it as a green witch hand. So here's another kind of reference point, right? Banana Mama Jama says, "Oh my God, this happened to me when I was really young too. I remember looking down the side of my dad's bed and seeing 2 green hands with long red fingernails. Almost immediately, they retreated back under the bed, slowly, like they were scratching the floor. I don't remember being scared, but I did think it was weird. The image has always stuck with me all these years, and I never told anyone because I thought it must have been my imagination because I was so young. But it felt so real. I have always had a lurking suspicion that it was." All right, this time it's 2 green hands with the red fingernails. So funny when these red fingernails come up. I like the idea of these manicured green hands. Not funny in that I don't believe it necessarily. It's just, I just get so tickled by these specific details, right? So they retreated slowly like they were scratching the floor, but I'm not sure if they got the same kind of sound that the other person did when they heard them scratching their nails on the sheet. Maybe they were just kind of, the way they looked, it's like they were scratching the floor, but I'm not sure if they actually heard the sound or not. I love to drink water says, had to comment as well and confirm that I saw a green hand as well when I was little. I'm from Scotland. I must have been around 8, and I was on the top bunk of my bunk bed when I saw this clawed, dark green, almost moldy hand with long fingernails come up from behind the wooden beams, clench into a fist, unclench, and then disappear back down again. I remember it so clearly. It couldn't have been a dream. This is another bunk bed, so they saw the green hands reaching up to their top bunk. And they describe the hand as almost moldy, with long fingernails. And then it clenched into a fist, unclenched, and retreated. I think that's definitely the first person we've heard describe clenching and unclenching of the fist. This next comment is from a deleted user, and they say, I used to see a green hand coming from behind one door in my house as a kid, and it absolutely terrified me. My mom told me to tell it to go away. And I did, and I didn't see it again for years. The last time I saw it was a couple years ago in my parents' garage that is not attached to the house. So this hand was coming out from behind a door, and they saw it multiple times until their mom told them to tell it to go away, which it did. Which I think if you're a parent, that seems like the best approach or advice could do when dealing with the paranormal is either yourself or telling your kid that if they report seeing something scary in their room, maybe, rather than saying it's not real, to say you can tell it to go away or we'll tell it to go away. And just see if that works, because it seems like telling your child that it's not real or it didn't happen doesn't seem to help with them thinking that it actually did or not. And then I have another comment from a deleted user that says, I saw a green ogre-like hand come out from under my bed when I was around 6 years old. It was in the morning while I was getting ready for school. I called for my mom, and the hands quickly shot back under the bed. This time they describe it as an ogre-like hand. So I'm imagining like a thicker, big kind of masculine hand. All right, I have one more comment. Coffee Wench says, oh my god, I've been watching this sub for years looking for this story. I saw the same thing when I was around 7 to 8 years old. I was in bed, and I had woken up and was playing with a toy in bed. I was on my right side facing the window. A green hand came up and groped the sheets, and I lost it. Jumped from the bed to the hallway, and ran to the kitchen for my mom. She told me it was my brother, a year younger, trying to scare me. This hand was an old witch hand with long nails. I guess I called it that, a witch hand, because of the Wizard of Oz. He denied it, and I never thought he did that because the hand was so big. I was certain it was a grown-up's hand. This was 30-some years ago, and I still to this day sleep with a pillow blocking my view of the side of the bed. This one again came up from under the bed, groped the sheets, and they describe it as an old witch hand with long nails, saying that they guess they called it that because of the Wizard of Oz. And they say that that was 30 years ago, and they still sleep with a pillow blocking their view of the side of the bed. So these things really last with people and change their behavior. They will block the cracks between the bed and the wall. They won't hang their hands off the bed anymore. Like, it really has an effect on people, these green hand experiences and other paranormal experiences. But in this case, the hands. All right, now let's take a little time to reflect back on all the information we've absorbed and all these different experiences. The resounding question, both from me and from commenters and experiencers, is, why is this so common? I mean, I don't know how common it is, but found quite a lot of people relating to it in just this handful of threads, if you will, that I found. I will present some theories that I've contextualized through comments posted on these threads. Gizmo Gator says, it's the boogeyman. Simple, but that brings up a great point. This is classic boogeyman imagery and behavior here. The boogeyman is the enemy of sleeping children. known to all, despite not really having an agreed upon appearance. Pause on that for a moment. And perhaps it's more accurate to say that the boogeyman is the enemy of children who aren't sleeping, but should be sleeping. The boogeyman is usually an entity introduced to children through their parents, who will get them if they don't go to sleep. They're usually assumed to live under the bed or in the closet. Now, I said that the boogeyman doesn't have a single agreed upon appearance. It may vary from parent to parent, culture to culture, or just never be assigned. But is it widely assumed that the boogeyman is green? A comment from a deleted user says, "The green hand under the bed thing is a common monster under the bed trope. It's not at all surprising if people were seeing things that the hand coming from under the bed would be green, particularly if a child was seeing it." Let's look at some other points of reference that may have influenced these green hands. Several people in the comments I read mention witch hands. Here's another one. Witness 1 says, "There was a bathroom in between my brother's and my bedroom growing up. Every time I used it, which was rare, even though it was closest and the most convenient, I always felt or saw in my mind a green, thin, witchy hand coming out of the toilet. It terrified me. I never actually saw it though, but it's weird that you bring this up." One comment from earlier said they described what they saw as a witch hand because of The Wizard of Oz, a film that had a huge cultural impact. And of course, there's this pop culture image of witches having green skin and long fingernails, which is actually something I talked about in my previous episode. I went through several sightings of people seeing witches flying on broomsticks, so I may as well take the time to toss in the same kind of theory here that I talked about there. There's this idea that because an image or an idea is so ingrained in our collective subconscious, a green witch, the boogeyman, Santa Claus, that perhaps it is projected onto some sort of otherworldly being or anomalous experience that we have. Maybe it's your mind making sense of what you see and throwing some sort of image on top of it, or maybe it's a conscious choice or some sort of reflex on behalf of whatever supernatural force you're seeing to somehow filter or grab these kind of points of reference from our subconscious and project it onto themselves. Who knows? Another person mentioned Goosebumps, which is definitely relevant to me. I loved Goosebumps growing up. I wish I knew the age and year of everyone's experiences. That would really help to kind of get a grasp on people's cultural references. I'm guessing that most people are around my age, give or take 5 to 10 years. I don't know. I'm 33, so I would think that people are generally around the same age. I'm not sure, but I have some other references that people have brought up. Wind Tree Rock says, "There is a toy clockwork bank you can buy. The one I remember was made of sheet metal. It was shaped like a building, had a small hinged front door. There was a button in front of the door that if you placed a coin on the button, a glow-in-the-dark green hand would come out of the door and snatch the coin." This is what I thought of when I saw "green hand" in the title. I think I found the toy that they are talking about, and it's from the 1950s. And yeah, it's called Frankenstein's hand, or sometimes Mystery Hand. And it is like a little tin box that's shaped like a house, a building, brick building covered with ivy. And there's a door at the front and a button that says "press here," I think. And a green hand, it looks like it's glow in the dark too, comes out to grab your coin and I guess deposit it into the bank. Interesting. Dolly Dewlap says, "Wow, fun spooky thread here. This triggered me to remember one of those bad horror movies I saw as a kid, The Crawling Hand. It was on a weekend TV in the early 1970s, and I also still remember a very creepy dream I had as a kid about a black hand and arm that was made of charcoal, and it had come down from a dead tree. But this green hand, commonality among so many people, what the hell is it?" The Crawling Hand, I had not heard of that movie. Doesn't look like it's received glowing reviews on IMDb, but I can still see it being frightening at the time to a child. I wonder, was the hand in their dream black or made of charcoal because the film they saw was in black and white? I don't know if that had some sort of influence on the way the hand appeared. Just a quick note. As I was doing my original script writing and recording, I had just looked at the IMDb page for the crawling hand. And on the IMDb page, the hand is kind of like a brownish color on the poster. Then when I was making the video, I looked up a picture of the poster to put on screen. And on Google Images, for all of the posters for the crawling hand, the hand on the poster, it's like an illustration, is green, which I thought was interesting. And it is a black and white movie. And I didn't watch it, so maybe, who knows, maybe they describe it as green in the movie. But then also I grabbed some clips from the movie, and there was a scene with the hand crawling around in the bed, like coming out from under the bed sheets and crawling under the pillow and hiding, groping the sheets, if you will. So it didn't come from under the bed, but it was in the bed amongst the bedclothes. So I found both of those things to be really interesting, given what we're talking about right now. Those are just some of the references that people brought up, and I'm sure there are others. If you can think of any, definitely let me know. Okay, these next comments are interesting. They are stories where people imagine or think of a green hand, but don't actually see one. Glowing Snake Planet says, I used to be scared of a green hand coming up from behind my head on my bed too as a child, but I never actually saw one. I always thought I was just imagining things. My dog was right says, I still usually leap from a couple feet away into my bed at night rather than walking up to it because I don't want something grabbing my ankles. So they didn't actually mention seeing a hand or anything like that. They just said that they would leap onto their bed at nights because they were afraid of something grabbing their ankles. So green hands are definitely something that have a sinister presence in the human subconscious. The thing in the closet, the thing under the bed. It's the color of monster skin, right? So is a green hand just the go-to appearance assumed behind these childhood fears? There's also a nursery bogey, which is basically the boogeyman. I mean, we get the word boogeyman from this English word bogey, which is essentially a monster or a mischievous spirit. And a nursery bogey is basically a monster that people who are taking care of children use to scare children into good behavior, right? So there's a nursery bogey called Jenny Greenteeth. Speaking of green, she is a green lady, and she's told, many children are told in, I think it's the north of England. I'm not sure. It's an area of England where these stories are spread, that if you go too close to a pool of water, that Jenny Greenteeth will reach out and grab your ankles and drag you in and drown you. And she does have green skin. So there again is this imagery of a green hand, a long, skinny witch, because she is like a haggish kind of woman, reaching out and grabbing you and dragging you in. Although this isn't under a bed, it's into a pool of water. So I'm just an amateur researcher and folklore enthusiast, right? I don't have any kind of degree or anything. Haven't done any formal study, but I have recently been researching a little bit about motifs. There was a specific motif that I was writing a little article about, and in folklore, there's indexes of motifs, and they'll be categorized and written in kind of a short blurb. Like, I'll just give an example with fairies, right? This is from the Motif Index of Folk Literature. Fairy house disappears at dawn. And then this is like a common motif that comes up in folklore and folk stories, particular to Ireland. So I was thinking, if we examined these green hands as a motif, well, looking at what I have a pretty small sample size, although I did find so many different stories, relatively, I guess, a pretty small sample size. I have about 20-ish stories here, stories and comments and whatever, and gathering my kind of a data breakdown with things like what color the hand was, if it was seen multiple times, yada, yada, yada. The most common instances, it seems, is that the hand was green, it came out from under the bed, and it groped the sheet. There were 17 or so of the stories that had green hands, and I mean, that makes sense because it came from a comment about a green hand, so of course people are going to tune in and say, hey, I saw a green hand. It's a good place for people to collect similar stories, right? 10 or so people said that it came from under the bed, and 6 people said that the hand groped the bed in some way, ran itself along the sheets, or scratched the sheets, or felt around on the bed. So I was thinking my kind of little motif structure would be green hand reaches out from under child's bed and gropes the sheets. I don't know if that's too long or if that would be a correct motif structure. But anyway, I had a lot of fun. I just really got sucked down a rabbit hole when I saw all these stories and just wondering, why is it so common? It's crazy. And then just thinking that it really makes sense, but it's very interesting that this is such a ever-present image in our subconscious. So there isn't one reference point for green hands in pop culture. Examples like the toy bank is potentially pretty obscure, and things like Jenny Greenteeth are pretty regional and definitely outdated for younger experiencers. And as far as just severed hands go, I mean, that's its whole subject on its own. You can find examples of this farther back in media and definitely in folklore, mythology, or religious symbology. So to me, all that says is that severed hands have a hold on our subconscious and always have. They don't always take on a sinister connotation. Sometimes severed hands are used for healing or good luck in folklore and superstition, but there's definitely something powerful about the imagery of a severed hand. A green hand does seem, at least in the modern world, to belong to monsters who lurk under beds, ready to grab ankles. I can't say, of course, whether or not people have really in actuality seen a disembodied green hand, but it is clearly a really common experience for children, and one that resonates through to adulthood. Is it a manifestation of this groping, grasping fear of the dark and the isolation children feel alone in their own bedrooms? Or is it something else? Alright, that's where I'm going to wrap it up for tonight with the green hands. There were more stories that I found about green hands, and I didn't leave them in because I didn't want to get too repetitive. Thank you so much for tuning in. Hopefully it was interesting to you. Let me know any thoughts you have. If you've seen a green hand, definitely let me know. But I will be back very soon with more stories and oddball theories. So until next time, take care and good night.